Alright, here we have another view of the RA worm and hinge assembly. I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you the adjusting screw for the hinges to remove all the play. Here on this side, on both sides are identical. There's a set screw that locks this 4mm Allen screw in place. What you want to do is make sure you don't have too much play back and forth on that hinge. Mine has none. But it also can't be too tight that the spring won't return it into mesh. So loosen the set screw, then using a 4mm Allen wrench, adjust it until you take all the play, side to side play, out of those hinge pins. And again, it's play this way that you want to get rid of. And yet you want it to remain loose enough so that it moves easily and the spring can return it into mesh. Once you've got that sorted out, then we can adjust the mesh itself, and that's what we're going to do right now. So again, set screw, 4mm Allen screw for adjust it, either side, adjust either side, but only adjust one side, and adjust it to remove all the side to side play on the hinges. Real simple, okay? Okay, here we are back at our shot of the RA mesh adjusting screws and hinge adjusting screws. And what we're going to do here is loosen these three screws. Don't worry about the adjustment because we're going to get it perfect. I mean, you can mark it beforehand if you're apprehensive, but I'm just going to loosen these three screws. And I had already pre-loosened these. You want these screws tight, but not too tight. Tight is tight, too tight is broke. So they have to be tight enough to keep this worm from easily moving out of position. But there you can see it's pretty loose. Now I show you the secret weapon in order to get perfect mesh. What we're going to do is take our tension screw, and I've got a steel rule here. But what we're going to do is insert the steel rule in between the tension screw, and again I have the spring removed and the ball. You can leave them in if you want, and just run it down until you've tightened that worm completely against the ring gear. Now if you wanted to, you could completely remove these screws and that would stay in place because again it's the steel rule and the tension screw is keeping it perfectly in line in mesh on that ring gear. Alright, so once you have pressure on it, at that point, starting with the center, tighten it, move to either side, tighten those, finish it up by tightening it securely. Now note I'm at the short end of this long Allen wrench. I'm not at the very end with 77 pounds of torque. I don't know the torque spec on these particular bolts, but I'm sure it's in inch pounds and not in foot pounds. So, okay, once you have it tightened, just loosen up that tension screw. Remove whatever spacer that you're going to use. It has to be at least 1 to 2 millimeters thick. And there you have it. You've adjusted your worm mesh, and you'll see how that affects it when we put that spring and ball in there. It has removed all the play and given you a perfect mesh. I'm going to insert the spring and the ball as soon as I pick it up off the table where I just dropped it. I drop the ball in there. Screw the spring and the tensioner in there. Now, we'll get it straight away here. Tighten it all the way down. And you can see now trying to rock that, there's absolutely no play. Back it off 1, 2 turns. Slightest bit of play. 4 turns. Again, slightest bit of play. I can't cam it out of position. Tighten it back down. Can't possibly tighten that, take that out of position. Okay, there you have it. That's how to adjust the mesh. And you can play around with that. Try different settings if you want. But that's the best way that I've found to properly set the mesh on the worm. Now comes the tough part, putting it all back together. Alright, now that we've properly adjusted the worm and ring gear mesh, at this point the next thing you might want to do is adjust the worm gear itself in the housing. On both sides there are brass nuts. The brass nuts have 2 slots in them. Since this nut is hidden by this pulley and can't be accessed unless you take the whole housing right out of the motor, which will require removing this pulley rather, and removing the whole assembly, you can access it on this side, the encoder side, and even with the encoder motor in, there's enough space with the plastic cover, the black plastic cover off, to get at that worm with the edge of a flat bladed screwdriver and just nudge it clockwise, turn it clockwise until you can't turn it anymore, and then back it off very, very slightly. That will set the worm up against the bearings perfectly, and remove all the side-to-side play there is between the worm and the worm housing and bearings themselves. I'm not going to take a video of that. I'll try to include a picture so you can see exactly what you need to adjust. But it's very simple, very easy to do while the assembly is in the mount. So at this point what we're going to do is reinstall the encoder motor. And when we do that, or prior to doing that, I want to show you something that's an issue with these encoder motors. The encoder motor is installed this way, by the way, with the flat and the connector straight up. But one of the problems with these encoder motors are these incredibly loose covers. This results in a lot of that crosstalk noise that you get and buzzing sounds. So before reinstalling this, what I'm going to do is tape this. I'm going to run a piece of gaffer's tape over the edge of this and then around the body to secure it, to remove all of this play that's present while it's installed in a mount. Because this shaft is spring loaded. Well, it's not spring loaded. Mine is spring loaded because I have a special conical spring under it and I set it up a specific way. I also disassembled the planetary. I disassembled this planetary, cleaned it off completely, and replaced it with LMX grease. You can use Lubriplate or another quality grease just to improve the overall characteristics of the mount. But let's just tape this cover up and I'll be right back. Alright, I've taped up that encoder motor. I am back, and I just use gaffer's tape, but you can use 3M brand tape. The number 33 tape is excellent. It's very thin, it does a great job, leaves no residue. Neither does gaffer's tape. You can use anything that you have available, but shame on you if you use duct tape, because that leaves an incredible mess if you ever want to remove it. So there we have it, and I'm going to reinstall it. Now the way I like to reinstall this, and you can do it whatever way you want, I like to install one screw first and work the encoder up against that screw until you just catch the threads, and then install each additional screw, again just catching the threads, because I can't even tell you how many times I've dropped these screws trying to get them in and out of this mount, or out of this encoder motor housing. So I found this is the best way to do it. And that one's caught. Once you have all 4 screws caught in the threads, then you can go ahead and push the encoder motor in against the flat. It fits in a recess, and then just tighten all the screws. Again, they're small screws. They don't have to be overly tightened. When you do tighten them sequentially. And I'm not using a lot of force there, just enough to keep the encoder motor. And that's it. What we're going to do now is reinstall the pulley. And on my mount it's going to be extremely easy. On your mount, not so much. I'll explain why. Okay, pulley time. This is the pulley. I'm going to try to explain why it might be a little bit more difficult on yours than it is on mine. You can see the pulley has a perfectly flat face. It's that way on both sides. So what I did is I chucked it up and I cut a little 1/16 of an inch chamfer on one face, just to allow getting that belt on easier. So put the pulley on. Tighten it. Reach up. Pull that cog belt down, make sure it's seated on the cogs on the worm pulley, and then just slide it over and you're done. It's as simple as that. It will not be that simple on your mount. You're going to have to play with it to get it over the pulley, but basically that's what you should look like when you're done. Alright, now that the pulley is reinstalled, it's time to reinstall the base, and I'm not going to bore you to tears with that because it's just 4 screws. So I'm going to go ahead and install that base right now, and I'll be right back after the base is installed. Alright, as you can see, I managed to get the plastic base back on for the RA board and main board. So what we're going to do now is install the RA board and the main board back to the mount. I'll show you a little trick before I do that. It has to do with weatherproofing these connectors. Before replacing these connectors, and that means all 4 and all the other connectors on the mount, get yourself some dielectric grease. This happens to be Permatex brand. I got it at a local auto parts store. You can use whatever brand you want. What to do with it is inject it into the connector prior to seating it. Then seat the connector like so, and wipe off all the excess from the connector. You've just weatherproofed that connector. So do that on all 4. Once you've done that, it's time to just reinstall these components on the mount. And there are just, again, 4 2mm Allen wrenches for the RA board, and the 3 Phillips screws for the main board. And when replacing this main board, be careful with this switch. It has to slide down properly into a recess there. Perfect. Okay. Has to slide down to recess, and do that before tightening it back down into the mount. And I'm going to replace those. I'm not going to bore you with replacing that, so let me be right back.